Okay, hello everyone and welcome to the private school admissions webinar. We are so excited to have everyone here. We had so much interest in this webinar. I know that it can seem like a really confusing process, but I have very good news. We have Linda and Wendy who are here from School First, and they are the experts. They've each worked in the private school sector for 30 years. And my company, Ivy Tutors Network, is in its 20th school year. So we've got a lot of experience here. I'm really excited to get through this information with you and then have time also, once you guys are all experts, for you to ask your specific questions. So we want to keep it to an hour. We want to be respectful of your time. So we're going to dive right in. And those of you just joining us, we're asking people to put in the chat where you're located in the world and what grade your child is in, because we are going to try to cover different locations. The private school, the independent school admissions process is pretty similar all over the country and similar for different grade levels. Let's just take a quick peek. It looks like we are very New York City heavy. I see one Washington, D.C. One Westchester. But otherwise, I'm seeing all New York. So that helps us also be really clear and guides us to talking a little bit more about the East Coast, certainly. Yeah, lots and lots of New York. All right. Should we start with intros?
Let's do it.
All right. Linda, tell us about yourself.
Hi. I'm Linda Talton. I started off as a kindergarten teacher in independent school. As you see, I have my son here, and he's the one in the black shirt. He is a career independent school student. He's now a sophomore in college. I've had the pleasure of having him at a few of my schools where I've been director of admission. I do want to address the question about location and region. My conversation when I was in San Francisco doing admission, which is where Wendy and I met many years ago, is the same conversation as it is in New York City. So just so everyone knows, as it is the same conversation in Washington, D.C., where my son attended St. Andrews. So we've been California, New York, D.C., and it's LA. It's the conversation is independent school admission is similar, almost identical in every city that you are. It's really a matter of having the connection with the admission offices at those particular schools, and which is why Wendy and I have split our locations based on where we are most familiar with the directors of admission and heads of school in these schools across the country. So I am happy to be here. Wendy and I are in a new partnership, so that's really exciting. This is our first year working together. But like I said, we worked together over the years in different ways, but mainly through the lens of admission.
Great.
Fantastic. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, I'm Wendy Wilkinson. I have also been in independent schools for 30 years now.
Wow.
And I started in the Bay Area, and that's where, as Linda said, we met. And when her son, who's a teenager in her picture, and my daughter, who is in third grade there, her first day at Sidwell Friends, long time ago, because they're both sophomores in college now.
Wow.
So we've been there, we have done it. And I say that's Allie, and then next to her is my son Miles, and they've had a wide variety of schools. I like to pretend that I use them as guinea pigs. I did not mean to, but they have lots of experiences, mostly because I worked at 8 different schools in the Bay Area. Allie joined me for several of them. And then we moved across country, and the first school we landed in was great for one of them and not so great for the other one. And that's when I had to take a deep breath and say, wait, how do we slow down? Let me figure out the right school for each child. I learned a lot. The youngest, who was in first grade there at Sidwell, moved away and went mostly to public in his career as a senior now in a public high school. I have worked at Sidwell Friends and National Cathedral School in Washington, D.C., and I've co-chaired the Association of Independent Schools in the greater Washington area. And that's really where I got to know all of the schools in the DMV. For those of you in New York, the DMV is not to go where you go get your license.
Mhm.
I had to learn that is DC, Maryland, and Virginia. So I do know the schools really well here, and I know the directors well. So I'm excited to share what we know and how we can help you process this seemingly overwhelming process. We like to think we can make it more fun and simpler than it needs to be, or they can
Awesome.
be.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And thank you for sharing about your kids and their different paths. It's, I think one of the most important things to highlight is that the same path, isn't right for every student, right? It's part of a huge part of this is finding the right path for your student.
Correct.
So that's a picture of me, not my kids. um, but I'll tell you about me. So about Ivy Tutors actually. So Ivy Tutors, is in its 20th school year. We work all over the country, primarily in New York City, and we help students succeed through personalized education. So we do a lot of tutoring. We also work inside of schools. We have school partnerships for test prep. In the context of what we're talking about here, we help a lot of students really get top scores on SSAT and ISEE, and the TACHS exam as well for parochial school in New York, and all the way up through the SAT and through 12th grade and everything in between. So, always want to be a resource for our students. I love doing these webinars and partnering with amazing folks for that reason. Okay, so, all right. So this is the number one question we get asked about is, okay, what should we doing now? What should we be doing now? What's the timeline?
Right. So the timeline is so important.
Yeah.
Because it quickly gets away from you. So right now, when you go to schools' websites, you'll see that most schools' applications went live at the end of August, at the latest, the first week of September.
Right.
The advantage to staying on task with that, I always tell people that if you get your application in, and this is kind of scary news because it can make people really lazy, but if you get your application in September 8th, or if you get it in December 1st, which is the deadline, your application will be considered still, but it'll change the trajectory of your admission process. Like you may miss out on interview dates, school visits, and they may have to put you on a wait list for those because they run out. So it just makes your life so much easier if you do apply for schools by the end of September, early October. It's just so much easier for you. So the timeline is September to March. So that's the first step. Isn't there? Wait a minute. Are you doing, Wendy? Are you talking about open houses or no? I'm doing that now.
So yeah, Linda, that's just overall, but there's some comments. If you could sit a little bit closer to your computer, there is sounding like you're too low for
Can't
them.
hear me? Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah,
I can turn it up.
thank you.
Okay. So I was saying that it's important to get your application in as soon as possible, just so that it makes sure your admission process easier. You'll have more access and you'll have more choice when it comes to signing up for interviews and for school visits, for open houses and for tours. It really would be great if you're sort of looking at websites, doing the research, figuring out what's a good fit for you. If you like the school, then trying to sign up for an open house. Most schools will let you do an open house without an application, but not a tour. So you definitely want to get your applications in so that you'll have options to see schools.
Can I clarify, Linda? Applications don't mean the complete application. So that could sound pretty overwhelming. It really means the first piece, which is your demographics, your address, your emails, your contact information, and the application fee, which is important. And if you qualify for financial aid, or you plan to apply, I should say, for financial aid, most schools will give you a waiver for that application fee.
And we're going to walk, this is really just an introduction to us. We're going to walk you through all these steps throughout this webinar.
Oh, good. Step by step.
Step by step.
Okay.
Next slide.
Oops.
Okay, so, excuse me. We've said it before in my introduction. I really had to slow down and think about each of my children. My dream is to have every family start slowing down earlier than I did. As soon, use this process as a time to get to know your kid in a different way. It can actually be really fun. It feels overwhelming, but there is a moment you can really stop and look at your child, look at the schools, imagine your child there, have them, if you have an 8th grader, have them imagine themselves there, and a 5th grader into 6th grade, etc. It's a great opportunity to explore how your child learns and have them start thinking about it and really consider her. What you don't want to do is get on the internet and see what other people think about schools, because they're not thinking about your child. They're thinking about whatever they want to be thinking about in the anonymous world of the internet. You really want to be thinking about what fits. Is she an introvert? Is he an extrovert? Does he need sports? Does she need sports? Do they just can flow and they just want to jump in and go? Or do we need a little bit more nurturing environment and maybe a little learning support? You really want to stop and think about that as you're exploring these schools.
Yeah, one thing that Wendy and I do is when we're meeting with a family, the very first thing we do is what we call an intake, where it's basically an extensive interview. So you're asking about everything from what type of school you think they'd be good at for you. And then sometimes that might be totally different, that might not be what they need based on the information that we get. And that's really how we help you guys to create a list of schools that would be good options for you to take a look at. Literally everything from teacher relationships, friendships, all those things are really important to consider when you're looking at a school.
We're hopefully helping you find a community for all of you.
Yeah. And I know in the New York area, the Parent League is an important resource, as well as ISEE, right? If you just want to look up schools, is that where you would go?
Yeah, that's a great, ISEE.org is ISS. Shall we put it in the chat?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. ISAAGNY.org. It has like the list of schools in New York City, and you can just click on that and there you can go straight to their websites. Wendy, is there one in DC?
There is AISGW.org is the same. Association of Independent Schools in Greater Washington.
You can literally break it down based on like your age of your child, co-ed, single sex, location, that kind of thing.
Okay. And does ISAGNY cover Westchester?
It does.
Okay, great. So for Westchester, ISAGNY as well. Great. So this is where, that's the first step, right? Is creating this school list, and in some ways the hardest, because there's a lot to choose from. Everybody here is from areas with just incredible schools and a lot of choice. And so how do you narrow it down?
Go to that next slide, because that's it.
Perfect.
I want to say one more thing about a source of information. If you are in the New York City area, Parents League has a school fair, middle school and high school fair that's happening September 19th through the 23rd. Unfortunately, it's virtual again this year. This is the 3rd year COVID that is virtual, but it's great because they organize it based on, it's alphabetically ordered. So once you go and you sign up, register for the fair, then you can see which day the schools that you're interested in are presenting. And you go into chat rooms. It's really cool.
Highly, highly recommend that. Yeah.
And the few DC folks, you can contact me. There's a few separate ones, but you have to be invited based on location. But we can make that happen. To Lisa's point, there are so many different kinds of schools. Think about what you're looking for. Think about what your partner, if you have a partner, is looking for, what feels right for your family. And then you might expand it. If you're working with Lena and I, we will certainly make sure that you are looking outside the box as well, if we believe that is necessary or important for whatever reason we're finding. We are very transparent. We will work with the family and say, this is why I want you to look a little bit further or a little bit different. Are you hoping you can do pre-K through 12th grade? If you are, imagine maybe that changes, because he or she will change in those years and the schools change in those years. So it is one thing. Believe me, when I signed my daughter up for kindergarten, where I was a middle school head in Oakland, I thought we would be there until she graduated 8th grade. She lasted kindergarten and 1st grade, and it wasn't the right fit for her. We hadn't even moved to DC yet, but we definitely moved her schools. That is how it goes sometimes, but there are a lot of different options. I have added, so you can go religious, and religious can be Catholic, there can be private. Independent schools tend to include Episcopal schools that are a wide variety of religious schools. Single gender, a lot of people don't think about that these days. Still actually is really interesting these days with the conversation about fluidity of gender. But those are important to look at and to ask those questions if that feels right for you. Boarding, of course, and I've actually added therapeutic day in boarding schools. I have experience with these programs, and as most of us know, all you have to do is read an article a week from the New York Times about the anxiety our kids are struggling with since the pandemic, and you'll realize that probably 1 in 5 of us are having to look in this direction. If you are, you're not alone. Certainly feel free to reach out, because if it's not me that's going to help you find those programs, I know a lot of resources to help you, because our kids deserve what they need at this moment.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. We're seeing a lot of attention stuff post-pandemic as well, and executive functioning. We have a lot of executive functioning coaches at Ivy Tutors Network who are all very, very busy right now. The pandemic was tough on humans, right?
Indeed. I will add, I'm sorry we didn't put public on there. I do think it needs to be said that that is a very possible option, and we're happy to talk with you about what that looks like as a strategy.
Absolutely.
And a concern and a consideration.
All right, so I started to talk about this before, and that's why I was confused, because I knew we had a slide that was very much about getting organized.
Yeah.
So this goes back to what I was saying when we first started, which is begin with the websites, get a sense of what feels right for your family, and creating the list is like the first thing. And that list will change, especially if you're going to school fairs, like the Parents League. If you're attending that, you'll say, oh God, no, that's nothing like what I thought it was going to be. So then that will go off. And then you'll go to another one where you'll say, oh my gosh, that is amazing. And so that will shift around, and you have time, there's time to shift that around in the first month or so of the admission process. I only say month or so because I don't want to get too far down the line before you are caught up going to interviews. By then you're kind of locked in there. You're going to create a list based on your interest. Schedule 4 or 5 school tours in September and October. And I guess, again, expand or reduce your list, and listen to you and your child only, because what I call playground chatter, and playground chatter happens in nursery school, and it happens all the way through college. You know exactly what you want. You're at a playground or a cocktail party and your friends are talking about this school and how this is so amazing for their child. So I just kind of try to minimize the noise. It's really hard when you're going through the process, and particularly if you're with friends who are also going through the process, it's hard to cut that noise out. But you really need to focus on you and your family.
Absolutely. Yeah, we hear a lot also about, in New York City, about the really competitive schools. If you're in a school if you're applying to high school as an example, and you're in a school that ends in 8th grade, you're competing with everybody else in your grade for some of these spots, right? So, I don't know, we always say, like, talk about something else, right? Like, don't create more anxiety for everyone, or realize that you're competing with all your best friends for the same thing. It's better to kind of keep this more private.
It is.
Yeah.
It really, that chatter is really challenging, because you don't know why a kid is getting accepted, or why your kid's being looked at, or there's so many aspects to this, most importantly numbers.
Yeah.
But it's easy to jump to conclusions about other people and other people's kids, and it just isn't. Our world needs a lot more joy than doing that.
Love it.
Focus on your kid and we'll be good.
Yeah. When you say schedule 4 to 5 school tours, how many schools do your clients typically apply to?
For me, I would say it depends on the age, the grade. If you're going into an entry point, it's generally about 7 to 10 schools.
Yeah.
If you're entering, like if you're coming on an off year, 3rd grade, 7th grade, it's almost easier. There are less options, but you know where your options are. So really it's a matter of me calling around and saying, do you expect to have this? Some schools will invite you to apply, and your process will be different. They won't invite you to interview until they realize that they're going to have attrition.
Yeah.
So, but I was 7 to 10 is for entry points, which would
Right.
be kindergarten, 6th grade, and 9th grade.
Yeah, that sounds right.
I try to keep it a little bit lower in DC, but I get that in New York, you need that. Sorry about the dog.
That's for you in DC, Wendy?
I try to do 5
Okay.
5 or 6.
The other thing I will add to that about the amount of schools is that the reality is that if you are going to be applying for financial aid, which Wendy will talk about later, I have families apply to more. It's unfair, but it's the reality that you're going to need more because schools do consider they don't have endless money, so they have to limit the amount of financial aid that they can award to families. So I do make them, out of safety, make a longer list.
That's a great tip. If you're applying for financial aid, apply to more schools. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And I understand we're recommending that you really do the school list in September. This is kind of the month to button it up, and then also get that beginning part of the application in, the part about your demographics and paying the application fee. That's what we're doing in September, right?
Yeah, I mean, that school list really can be produced in April, May. That's ideal.
Oh, the year before. Yeah.
Well, you have
100%. 100%. I'm thinking about like the 5th graders and the 8th graders in the room. Like, this is it. This is your deadline, September. Yeah. Better to have worked on it last spring with you guys. Yeah, for sure. Okay, great.
You look like you want to say something.
I see a question about financial aid. We're going to get to, I'll speak in detail about that with financial aid.
Am I school tours?
I'm school tours. So I just was giving school tours just last year at National Cathedral School, and I love giving them. And it's a really, really important time. Tours, for the most part, I will say in DC, and Linda, correct me, make sure we are saying the right thing for New York. DC, you can take a tour without applying. You can't do an interview for the most part, or a shadow visit until you've applied. But you definitely can take a tour, and some you can do the interview as well without the application form. In New York, is it mostly you apply first before the tours?
You can go to an open house. Very few schools will let you tour without an application. Some will. It's gotten much more tight, obviously, with COVID. Like, most schools were not, but very few schools will let you do that. There's a handful. You have to submit before you can take a tour. Just too many people.
Right. Well, the important piece about school tour is this is for you. Us admissions folks want you to go and see the school and make sure it is something you're interested in. So the school people are doing their job by showing you the school. Now, of course, you still want to be kind of polite, but we're not checking you. We're not writing notes about you during the school tour. We want to share the school with you and enjoy our engagement with you. So check it out and ask questions. Now, of course, they'll remember if it's a question trying to catch them or on the spot, they'll remember you. But they really want to answer and make sure you know everything about the school. See it in action. Look for a kid that's kind of like your kid, right? I know that at my last school, there are a lot of girls it was a all-girls school, just wanting to engage and get right out there. So it can feel like if I have a quiet girl, maybe this isn't the school for her. So I always try to point out, make sure you're looking for the quiet kids too. If you have a quiet child, you want to make sure they're engaged and they're happy and their smiles across the board. So you want to see your child in these classrooms when you're going. Look at how the teachers are engaging. When you're walking through, are the older kids smiling? Are their heads down on the phone all the time? What's happening on the campus? And really imagine your family there. And if you walk away and your stomach is saying, we don't belong here, take note of that. That's okay. If somebody else says it's the best school in the country, that may be for them, but if it doesn't feel like it's yours, now if there's one thing that didn't feel right, but the rest of it felt great, then you might want to give them another chance. But it's okay. There are so many great schools that you want to feel like this is where your family belongs.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are applying to a school but did not get to go on a school tour, does that hurt your application?
No. I mean, some schools will say you have to go on a tour to complete the application, so they'll make sure that you do. Some, especially now, there's a lot of ways to visit virtually. What
Mhm.
we want as admissions directors is that we want you to know who you're applying to. You
Mm.
know, if you're seeing none of it, but you send an application, it doesn't hurt your chances, except that it looks like you're not interested.
Yeah, that's what
And
happens.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, when you're looking at say they're on Ravenna, you can see how often you participated. Nobody's going to see, oh gosh, they participate 10 out of 12 things, we want them. That's not how it looks. But if you've gone to the only required things and not a tour, or you don't really know the school and the interview didn't demonstrate that you know the school, that's where it would hurt you. Because we don't want you just choosing a certain school for its name or its
Yeah,
reputation.
they're gonna wonder when they're sitting around making decisions and they're looking at everything that you attended and you didn't come to events. I mean, the great thing now is it's more
So
equitable.
it is something that they're looking at, whether you
Yeah,
attended events. Okay.
especially
Just so you know it.
what'd you say?
I just want to also balance that out. They also are offering 25 events, and we don't
Yeah,
want you to feel like you have to go to all of those. You do want to go to the ones that are required or highly recommended, like an in-person tour,
exactly.
Okay, great.
because that demonstrates that you know the school now.
I always tell everybody that if you're applying to 5 schools, you're going to 25 things or you're doing 25 things, right? Because you're doing the application, you have the interview, you have your child visit or interview, that you have the open house and then the tour. That's exhausting. What I love about COVID, if you have one really good thing, is
Silver linings, silver linings.
oh my God, the silver lining is that you can interview from your kitchen or your office
Mhm.
for that matter, right?
Yeah.
So you're not taking 3 hours out of your day to go to an interview that lasts 45 minutes.
Mm.
So, and most schools are still giving you the option of going to an in-person interview or doing a virtual. And also so many schools that are doing talks, like head of school talks or learn about our math program talks, they do give virtual
Is it
options.
virtual?
Yeah. Okay. So helpful. All right. So what is in these applications?
Okay. So like Wendy was speaking to originally when I was talking about the applications and when to get them in, and she saved your souls by reminding you that you don't have to get the whole application in. So really a lot of schools are using Ravenna now, which I love because it makes
Yes.
right? It's great because it makes
It's
your life
great.
so much easier. I wish every single school used it. It's more schools are starting to because they're catching on that it is very sweet and user friendly for families. So really, it's you putting in your logistical information, and that will allow you to look to see what events schools are offering. Logistical, child's age, address, date of birth, those kinds of things, and then you can actually sign up for interviews. I'm not interviews, but events. Um, in DC, Wendy, I feel like it's a little different because you sent like some families could go to interviews even without completing the
Some of them.
application. Okay, and then you'll see that the first part of the application is just that. It's that your logistics, and then it moves on to your parent questionnaire. So you're answering questions about your child, and depending on if once the kid's child starts getting older, 5th through 12 or 9th through 12th grade, then there's a portion for a student questionnaire. And that's the student questionnaire is part of the supplemental materials, which is also includes teacher recommendations. Sometimes they'll ask for a counselor or principal, head of school recommendation, and that would include your transcript, which it would be your grades from if you're applying to 9th grade, it'd be your entire 8th grade year, and no, I'm sorry, your entire 7th grade year and the first part of 8th grade. And that would be considered your transcript. And all those are due pretty at some point in January.
Mhm.
A
Mhm.
lot of schools mid to late January.
Okay.
You want to add anything to that, Wendy? Ooh,
I like to make sure, I tend to recommend people ask their current teachers right before Thanksgiving.
yeah.
It gives them about 3 months to really know the child. And most people are saying, oh, they don't really know her, they don't know him. Everybody's in the same boat. The teachers knew. They know them better this year than ever in the past, the last 3 years with the COVID problems. But everybody will get that current teacher recommendation or 2 current teachers. And if you ask them before Thanksgiving, it gives them several weeks to complete it. It gives them enough time to know your child, but then it also gives them time. And I know a lot of teachers like to use that Thanksgiving break to finish these recommendations so they can be complete. So just a
Smart.
nice, thoughtful way.
It's very thoughthtful.
You
Otherwise,
want
you have
your
an angry
teachers,
teacher.
you want your teachers happy when they're writing that
Like
letter
you have the
recommendation.
teacher who's doing it over Christmas break and they are not happy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So just to summarize, you know, if you haven't already, this is the time, we haven't talked about tests yet, but this is the time to do test prep and your diagnostic tests or your mock tests. This is the time to really finish that school list if you are applying for next year, right? So in the fall, you want to attend tours, virtual and in person, and that's after you get that Ravenna in. So after you get the initial application, and then you're invited to do tours. Also this fall, you're going to want to start essays, statements. Around Thanksgiving time, you're asking the teachers for recommendations. You're attending school fairs. We talked about finalizing the list. That's because it is fall now, right? You're also going to want to take your first SSAT or ISEE or TACHS exam. TACHS is for the parochial schools in New York. You're going to want to do those student interviews. So everything happens quite quickly in the fall, right? And there are other informational events. This is what Wendy and Linda were talking about, how, you know, each school has many, many, many events, and you're not required to go to all of them, but you're going to see a lot of events up, and you should be taking advantage of at least some of them. And of course, you're getting those teacher recommendations, right? Or Thanksgiving time. Later on in the winter, you're going to complete your application, do all the supplements like Linda was just telling us, including handing in essays, and teacher recommendations and all these things. The financial aid application gets done. You're going to send your thank you notes. And then you also in the winter, right, just a couple of months later, you get those decisions. It's just an overview of the timeline. So interviews is this is something that a lot of families also have questions about, because it can be quite scary. Some kids interview really well. Some kids are really outgoing, but they get shy in an interview, or they feel like they don't want to brag. So we get lots of questions about this. You know, what should you advise your child to do in an interview? What makes a good interview? Oh, I think you're muted.
I was saying, wherever I was director of admission, whatever school I was, this was my favorite part, is the kid, especially the kids. I love interviewing the parents too, because it does inform who the child is, right? And vice versa. But I always tell everyone that the interview, just as Wendy was saying about the tour, is your time. So come in, and I think the intimidation can be a little bit dulled by you taking ownership of it, right? You come in, this is your time to learn. Is this the school for my child? These are my questions. And it's okay to come like with, and some people, you don't even have to tell them this. I have had people, when I ask if you have any questions, they have an entire sheet of questions. Like, we only have half an hour, but I like that. It's really good for people to come and ask questions, particularly if they know some things about the school and want to ask pointed questions about things that they may have seen on a tour, at an open house, talking to parents, the playground chatter that I explained, clearing those questions up. That's a great time to do that. So this is really your time for you to get to know the school. They're going to ask you questions about yourself. Every interviewer is different. For pre-K to fifth grade, students aren't doing interviews. Those are mostly visits for the students. Parents are the ones being interviewed for the younger kids. And assessments are usually being done in-house, especially since COVID. ERBs are being required of very few schools for that age anymore, which is great. Most schools have turned to doing in-house. Even before COVID, a lot of schools started doing in-house assessments instead of using ERB. Wendy, do you want to speak really quickly to the WSPE?
Yeah, it probably ranges in New York and DC. Most schools are stepping away from these tests and using ERBs or school records. The WSPE and the WISC, if you've not been a part of these, they are tests that you go into as testers office. It's a psychologist who tests, and there is a fee. Often they find they can do sliding fees, sliding scale payments. The schools that you're looking at can give you testers information to schedule those. But again, check for each school what they're looking for, because if you're applying to a bunch of schools that do not ask for these, you don't have to go through the expense and the time of taking those. And that's important. And a lot are moving away because of since COVID and equity issues, et cetera.
Yeah, which is so great. For the 6th to 12th grade, the students are doing interviews, but what I tell my clients when I'm doing interview prep, which a lot of times you don't really need a lot of sessions, it's really about making eye contact. And I understand it's really about getting comfortable talking about yourself. And I tell them, it's okay to brag. If you have something really cool to talk about, I know it feels like bragging, even in the world of Instagram, where you're bragging all day about yourself. It's amazing how kids are still really sort of uncomfortable saying how cool these things that they're doing are. But
Yeah.
and then the other thing to keep in mind is that interviewers know that they're kids.
Right.
They're 12, they're 13, they're 11. So they're used to, I don't know. A good interviewer will know how to draw them out and figure out the questions. And luckily, hopefully they will have read the application, because they will have that now. So then that's another way that they'll get your child to talk. So that's why I think it's so important to share really vital information when you have an opportunity in your application, because that's a great way for them to get you to talk. My favorite thing to share about interviews, and Wendy and I have talked about this, the interview starts, if you're going in person, the minute you step on campus or in that school building or in front of that school building, because I can't tell you how many times there could be a janitor could be outside cleaning and come and say, Linda, who was that couple that just came in? I heard them saying so-and-so about the school, or they were arguing, or it literally, or sitting in the lobby, the receptionists will have shared things with me over the years. So
Wow.
that's just a little tidbit, because it's just off the beaten path information, but it's true. And it's like good to know that you are being people are watching you. Because, you have to think that these schools are very protective of their school communities, and they care about who's being invited into them. So yeah.
Yeah, that is important to know. So definitely you want to, prep your child to brag about the things that they're good at and the things that they've done, and to act excited about their accomplishments, and not see it as bragging. What other questions should they be prepared to answer? Is there, certainly, like, why do you want to go to the school is an important one, right?
Absolutely.
Can I jump in? First of all, I think it's hard for parents to be the ones preparing a kid. It's just not organic. And what we want to know who this child is. And when they come over prepared with answers that feels less fun for the admissions person. So the over preparation and doing it with parents, that usually provides, well, you may have a very unique relationship with your 13-year-old, but in my experience, the 13-year-olds aren't really wanting to do that. So maybe having a Starbucks coffee with a friend's mom, or something like that, of just, hey, what are you looking for? What do you like in school? Just so they're getting used to talking. What are your favorite activities? And just to be comfortable in their own skin, talking about themselves.
To do some mock interviews with not the parent.
Yeah. And even when I was a middle school head, I would do mock interviews with the kids, and sometimes they would come really like overly prepared. And my biggest feedback, and Lynn and I do this with our clients, we'll work with the kids and say, I feel like you're saying what you want me, what you think I want to hear.
Yeah.
And that kind of, we really want you to be you. Like if you are, you've never played a sport in your life and you're really into esports, that is what you are, who you are, and what you like. We want to hear that. We don't want to hear about your football that you've never played. We don't want them to say something that seems like that applicant kind of.
Right. So you don't need them to fit into a box. You need them to be authentic.
We want them to be authentic, because then they're going to find the school that's right for them.
Yeah, that's the whole point. Yeah.
Love it. Love it. I don't know how it's 7:15 already, but I'm going to race through some of this test prep stuff. So this graph has some information about most of the tests. So this is really geared towards high school admissions, since I see we have a lot of 7th and 8th graders here today. In New York City, we have the SSAT. That's a public school. It's a specialized public school exam. So in terms of independent schools, the ISEE and the SSAT are competitors. They are really similar. They're written by different groups. So they, the way that it's worded is different. The how long the test is different. I'll go into that later. But every New York City school takes either one. So you can take the ISEE or the SSAT. What we typically want families to do, and again, if you're an 8th grader, it might be a little late because now you have to just jump right into the test prep process if you haven't already. But if you are, for example, a 7th grader, what we want you to do is take a sample of the ISEE and the SSAT, and very often the student will prefer one test over the other, or they'll do slightly or a lot better in one test over the other. And that just means it's a better match for them for a plethora of reasons. But we want you to study we want you to choose the test that you're naturally a little bit better at, right? The TACHS exam is for parochial school. And then there's also the HSPT, which just 4 schools in New York take that, and it's a scholarship exam for parochial schools. All right, so a little bit about test prep. Started to go into this. We want to start with a diagnostic test to help you make a plan of action. You want to know what's on the test, right? So you take the diagnostic, you start prepping. It's really important to understand exactly what's on each test. So we help with that, of course, but you can also, we have a great blog, there's lots of information out there. So know what's on the test. So in New York, ISEE, SSAT are the same, all schools accept it, maybe not in other areas. It's important to register for these tests. So it's something that parents forget to do sometimes. There's so many parts of this process. You have to, the whole application process that Linda and Wendy have been talking about, there's another piece, right? And yet another piece and yet another whole process, which is registering for these tests. We usually recommend that students take a November and a December test. So it's, maybe some of you have a good memory or a recollection of taking the SAT or ACT. It's the same thing. When you take a test for the first time, you learn a lot about yourself as a test taker. And usually students will come out of the test after the first time and say, oh, I know I got that wrong, or I know I could do better in my pacing. And so I want to try it a second time. And we usually see a big bump in the second time. So that's our recommendation. This bullet point, the actual bullet point is missing next to the bolded, the caps word read, but this is my number one, best piece of advice for how to do well on a standardized test. So students who are good readers, who are reading books and periodicals daily, who, for those of us who are in middle school, try to read something a little harder with tougher vocabulary words. Like we're recommending the New Yorker, the Atlantic, some kids who love science, we say, well, the New York Times has a science time section on Tuesday. Read that every week, and then you'll have to do less test prep when the time comes, right? Because a lot of test prep is learning how to be a good reader and learning vocabulary, and you can kind of fast track all of that by doing reading. So we want you to start test prep at least 3 months before your test date. I will say this. So COVID has really thrown a wrench into this process. What we are finding is that even A+ students, so students who do really, really well in school and are very academic, they are not scoring very high on a diagnostic test, lower than they have any other year. The last 2 years have been tough. Why is that? If you have a student who's getting an A+, why are they not doing well on a diagnostic IC, SSAT, TACHS test? It's not their fault, right? It's the schools and because of COVID, did not get through all the material. So test prep is 3 things. It's knowing the content, it's learning test prep strategy, and then it's lots and lots of practice of those 2 things. And so we might have to teach you new content. We might be teaching you strategies that you've never heard of before, and you have to practice that for a long time. But this content piece at the beginning, which we used to, you know, I told you guys we've been around for 20 years, we used to fly through that portion. We, you know, kids knew most of the content. There's some advanced math, there's some advanced vocabulary on these tests. You know, we'd have to teach some of that, but a lot of it kids knew. Nowadays, there's a lot more content to learn. So we have, for if you're applying to high school, I really do recommend that you start this process, the test prep process, in 7th grade, right? So, you know, do you have to take these tests? That's a really good question. It really depends on the schools you're applying to. A lot of very competitive schools, especially for high school, are asking, they'd rather see a test score, even if it says test optionals. With some schools, that's not the case at all. So this is where, you know, Linda and Wendy are great in support, and they will tell you which schools have what kind of philosophy around standardized testing. Certainly, you can also get a feel by calling the school or looking on their websites. So, you know, basically, if you have a really great test score, it's a big boost to your application. So one important thing is, after doing some test prep, you know, you see a bump in that score and you think to yourself, all right, I'm going up X number of points every time I take a mock test. If I keep going in this direction, by November, is that score going to help or hurt my application? So we try to get all of our students in a position where the score is really going to help boost their application, right? So there's, you know, some little bits of advice on here. When you take the ISEE or the SSAT, you do not want to write in the schools that you want the score to go to. So you want to see the score first and then decide if you're going to share it with the schools. Super important. Don't list the schools first. Get the score and then decide if you want to share it. So with the TACHS test for the parochial schools, you have to list the schools before you get the score reports. That's not possible, but ISEE and SSAT, get the score first. Everybody has an off day once in a while. You don't want to share a score that you're not super proud of. What else? You know, people ask me how much do students go up, right? So what, you know, if my child starts with a really low score, are they going to get to the 8 or 9 level that, you know, for very competitive New York City high schools? So the answer to that really depends on how much the child is motivated. So I know that, you know, if you're doing the prep, if you're putting in 30 minutes per day, sometimes students do an hour every other day, that works too, you're going to see improvement. And of course, nowadays, it's also really important. I think, you know, we have, you know, hundreds of students every year in the last couple of years who are really shocked by their initial diagnostic. And then what that signals to them is that, you know, this test prep process is also going to help the student become a more confident 8th grader if you're applying to high school, and a confident high schooler, right? So it helps students fill in those learning gaps. So another question I get a lot, which test is easier, the ISEE or the SSAT? I don't know if we have time to get into this entire slide. We have a great blog about this on our website, great article, and you can screenshot this if you want. But, you know, some people say that if you're better at math, ISEE will show both math scores, right? So you get actually 2 math scores, and that can help you show off your math knowledge. The SSAT takes points off for getting questions wrong. So some people are not really into that. You know, one test has analogy questions, the other has test completion questions. Those are important to kind of do some of them and see what makes more sense to the student. The SSAT has breaks, and it allows you to do creative writing. So it's an option. So those are just some differences. Okay. Yes.
All right. I mean, it might have been me. I'm the worst test taker ever. So I started getting really nervous. And so I want to reiterate, or
Yeah.
maybe say for the first time, Lisa is here as a resource. You now know her name, and she's at Ivy Tutors, and that's really important because as you go through this and you think about your child and what they're going to need, you can call her and get even more details because you can see what an expert she is. That's the same for us. We're going through the admissions process really quickly, and there's a lot to it. We are still available to slow it down. In fact, if you look at Ivy Tutors webinars upcoming, we're going into details for all of these as we go through the process. So this tonight is our first webinar. We're going to be giving more detailed. Our next webinar is, I think it's about the actual assessments, interviews, and visits. And then we're going to do financial aid 1.0. And there's quite a few more webinars that we are going to give you further information. So
there's so much detail.
There's so
it's hard to do in one kind of zoomed out webinar.
Totally. We want to give you an overview so you have the arc of this year.
Yeah.
But I can see how hearing it all at once can feel like, oh my God, this is too much. So I hope that's not your takeaway. We're all going to be here tomorrow, and you'll get all of our contact information at the end. So feel free to keep asking questions. But to continue, once you get everything in December and January, there'll be a quiet time. Your kids hopefully will be enjoying the school year without the burden of one more responsibility, which is applying to schools. They can just be at their current school and take a deep breath. And then it depends on your region, around early March, sometimes late February, sometimes late March, depending on your city, you will get if you're on Ravenna, it'll be a post, and an email that says, go to this post, or you'll be getting the decisions. And they usually are around the same time in your city if you're in private schools. And you'll either get an accept with the financial aid that the school believes you qualify for, or that they can afford to give you, and a financial aid wait list. And what that means is they want your child, they just don't have enough money to give it to you at this time. But in those 2 weeks of decision time, then you can have, then the money sometimes comes back and they can still give it to you possibly and still get you. And then there's a wait list. Depending on your age and depending on the school, wait list really means wait list. Now, there are some schools that don't want to say no to any child, and so it might be a wait list. It's worth asking. When you get a wait list, ask your consultant, or ask if you have one, or ask the school, is your wait list quite large? What does that mean? And if you get the wait list and that is your first choice school, you want to let them know. Again, we're going to talk about this in a later webinar in real detail because that's months away. So I'm just giving you the overview. And if you get the deny, you likely will. If you apply to a bunch of schools, most people get 1 or 2 denies, and it's helping our kids breathe in. That's the world, and that's what we live in. It's not the right school for you. See ya. We're moving on to the school where we belong, right? If you get accepted, if your child, I should say, gets accepted to the schools often will have revisits, and that's a time that it's a different feel. You walk in and you get to be at that school if that's what you choose. So it's a different feel for your child. They can go in and start breathing in for who they are and what, not worrying about what other people are thinking, but really breathing it in. There are a lot of different opportunities for diverse families to build. You get to meet current families and current students, etc. Most schools allow for 2 weeks where you get to visit different schools and make a decision. And again, we're going to be discussing this in a later webinar at length.
Right. So we're hoping that the timelines match up better this year. The last 2 years, in New York, it's common that students apply to private school and also to the specialized schools. And because of COVID, the specialized results were so late that we had a lot of issues with families having to make deposits before they found out if they were admitted to a specialized school. So I hope that will be fixed this year, because usually, you get all of the news in March, right? Generally, that's
Well, and we can go into what happens if that happens, but not now because it's September,
right.
Yes,
right?
right.
Yes, step by
But,
step. It's
but at our decision webinar, we will go through it because it may happen again.
Right
Yeah.
now,
And we want to help.
school list, and start your application. This is school list time and application.
Yeah.
And everything that we've talked about, whatever the topic is, we will revisit all of these things in
Correct.
a bit, just to give a little review each time. Then you'll be experts.
Yes.
All right. I think the next slide is an important one. Somebody asked if it's against your family if you're applying for financial aid. I want to say no, absolutely not. What was said is people are not going to say, oh, we're not even looking at this application seriously because they applied for financial aid. And with that said, because it's a different pool, admissions comes first. No school is need blind anymore. We all have budgets. And that was a dream that happened in the 80s and in the 90s, and that went away. However, most schools, every school I've ever worked at, I will say, and that's 9 independent schools across the country, we look at admissions first. We figure out which kids we feel are the really great fit. And then just the admissions director and the financial aid committee looks at the financial aid. Okay, tell us who you want. Great. We're going to figure out how we can make this financial aid work. And then they do their best to meet your needs. So please don't avoid applying for financial aid if you think that you need it, or if you're not sure and you might be on the cusp. You will be surprised, particularly in our major cities, what qualifies.
Yeah.
These very expensive schools. You may say, I am upper middle class, or I may not qualify. There is no harm applying because you may. And schools are trying to get the diversity, the socioeconomic diversity. So they want to find families that will get a $5,000 grant as much as they want to find families that need 98% award. So please don't hesitate. That it's not a mark against your child. They may not have the money to give it to everybody. That's why we expand the list. That's the reason we expand the list, not because people are going to mark that child as they don't want them. Absolutely not true. Yeah. We want the socioeconomic diversity. We just need to make sure that we are meeting the needs and the budget. And that's why we have you apply to several schools. But we know the admissions directors will be talking to finding out what is their budget this year for what grade. For instance, if you're applying for 8th grade, financial aid is going to be hard. We tend not to put money in grades that aren't a entry point. So that's something to keep an eye on and keep in your mind. With that said, you want to make sure you are applying if you need it. If you apply as if you're going to be a full pay and then suddenly you can't pay, or you pull it together by a whole bunch of different means in the first year, and then you apply for the second year. Some people think that's how you get in. A lot of schools are not going to appreciate that, and they're going to know. They can tell if things haven't changed, and that's going to not be a community building. It's really hard to build the socioeconomic diversity in that way.
Also, some schools, what they're doing is that if you did not apply the first year, you have to, and you get in based on you, and you like Wendy said, pull the resources together through family members or however you've done it. You're sort of on you can't apply the next year. You have to wait till the following year. So it's not just a matter of getting in. Some schools, not all, but some schools do that. And one other thing, to piggyback on what Wendy said, for me, I never wanted to see who was applying for financial aid until I had made my admission decision. Sometimes that would shift, but it really was me looking at the family and the kids. Even though some people would in the interview talk about financial aid with me, I didn't want to see the list until it was that final step for me.
That's interesting.
For me, it was, I talked about it because I was a director of financial aid too. I talked about it all the time with families, and in my mind, I just prayed that if that was a child we could get, I'm going to fight for that kid, and that's going to be where the money goes. So if you need aid and you love that school, build a relationship. Yeah. Because we're going to fight for the kids that we think this is a great fit for, and we're going to do our best to prioritize money for that family. We have great budgets. It just has to be spread out.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not talking detailed into this. If you want to screenshot this slide, because it gets into details about what we're looking for in financial aid. Financial aid applications are usually due in December. They aren't even open for the most part yet. So don't fret, just start thinking about whether or not you are going to apply. I'm going to go into great detail on October 19th in a webinar. If you can't make it, we're going to record it as well. But that will talk about what is TADS, what is SSS, FAST, and Clarity. These are platforms that all schools use. And then we're going to talk about what to include, how much transparency you have to give, the vulnerability of it, and why it's worth it. And I will answer all those questions then.
Okay, wonderful. Linda, you mentioned that families sometimes bring up financial aid in the interview. Do you recommend that or no?
Yeah, I do. I mean, you're telling your story. If that's an important piece of your story that you want to share, 100%.
If it's comfortable for you.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's what I mean. If
Yeah.
they feel the need, and that's usually the only ones that will do it are the ones that are.
If you want that to be part of your story,
Yeah,
important part of your story. Okay.
And that is for many families, and it causes anxiety. So when you're in a safe space, which is the office, and it's just one-on-one, or it's three of us in the office, then that's a time to share things like that, or ask questions about those things. Yeah.
It's good information for you too. If the school's awkward about it and doesn't feel comfortable, and well, I don't know if we'll give you there's that. I always say that around diversity too. If it really matters how diverse it is and the people don't have the answers for it, it gives me information about the community.
100%.
And then you walk away and you take that information. What does that say to you, and how does that help you inform your decisions?
Absolutely.
If you apply for financial aid and they would like to accept you, but they don't have the aid, is that a possibility? Could they say, yes, you're accepted, but with no aid?
Each school has a different way of doing it.
Every school's different.
And it's hard because I tended to give a yes with financial aid waitlist, which is kind of a tease, because it's, we want you, but we don't have money for you right now. But I always wanted the kids to know that they earned a spot at a really hard school to get into. That felt better. And I tried to call the families and explain what financial aid waitlist meant, and that maybe it'll come, but don't bank on it. And if another school gave you a good package, take it. But so it's really hard. A lot of schools will give a wait list, period. And then if money comes, that they'll go to you, that family on the wait list.
Yeah, that's what I've done. I just do wait list.
I think it's more fair, actually.
Okay. And you mentioned that it's important to build a relationship with the school, which I couldn't agree more. But how much should you reach out? How much reaching out is too much? Is this the parent calling? Is it the child calling? Is it no calling at all? What does that mean to build a relationship?
Okay. Wendy, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, nobody really uses a phone anymore.
Right.
Director for the last 9 years. By last year, I maybe got 3 calls.
Got it.
We would do Zooms. We would set up appointments. You want to be able to have a conversation with the director at some point. And if that could be at the open house and you make a connection, it could be at your interview. You want your child to be known, but you don't want to be known too much. There is a fine line because these people are incredibly busy. But, it depends, you don't want to just bug them for easy questions that you can find on the web. You want to connect and say, how can my child, or a letter from your child, email, if it's an 8th grader, an email from your child is why they want to be here, is pretty wonderful. I preferred those over thank you cards because I couldn't put the thank you card in their file, their digital file where the committee could read it, but I certainly would put their email in that file. And then people like, oh, that was such a cute email, or that was so nice. So I think now that it goes digitally, everyone says email is too casual, but it actually is just that much easier for the directors.
What if I have a child who's written an essay and gotten an A+, and the teacher has asked them to enter it in an essay contest? Would you have your child write an email to the admissions director and say, I'm really proud of this essay. I wanted to tell you about an accomplishment, or is that overboard?
Well, for New York City, the great thing is graded essays are required for most of the schools now.
Yes.
So it would be part of your packet. I think if it's part of the packet and the school's already asked for it, then I wouldn't send it.
And
If
if
it's
To share an accomplishment. I won the spelling bee.
if we haven't asked, then I wouldn't mind getting that.
No, I don't mind it at all. And you know, it has to fill out. This is true for the letters of recommendation. Additional letters, it has to tell us something different that we can't find out through the letters of recommendation or through the interview. We don't want somebody, you know, for instance, a lot of times we get soccer coach letters. Unless your child that is their life and that's where they're going and that's why they want to come to your school is to play soccer for your team, then it really is not adding because every 90% of DC kids play soccer. So it doesn't make your kids stand out, if that is fair. If they are an impact player as they get older and that's where they're going to shine, and then of course. But if your kid is your steady Eddie, loves school and is going for it, a soccer recommendation is like, she's a cool kid, isn't going to add to it. We want a steady Eddie kid. We don't need the fatter, you know what they say about the fatter the file? It doesn't necessarily mean
It means that's too much. That's what I always say. Like, what are you giving me so much information for? What is happening here? It does make you wonder sometimes. Sometimes it does. I just had this conversation with a client the other day asking about recommendations, and I thought, well, and just what Wendy said, what is it speaking to that you're not? What is missing from your story that you will tell with this additional information? If not, then it makes you wonder why they need so many recommendations.
You just want to think about the people reading it. There are 3 people usually on the committee who are reading a file. These schools get a lot of files.
Yeah.
You want to think about how does yours uniquely talk about your child, period. Doesn't have to be fully detailed. It has to be your kid, because then that kid is going to find the right school.
I love that.
And with that said,
yes,
my favorite thing to say every time I do these webinars or interviews or open houses is, guess what? Every child goes to school. They have to, it's the law. So they will get into a school. They will go to school and you will find your fit. The great thing about these cities that we live in is that you could be in a city where you just go down the street and go to your school, and people do that. And sometimes kids thrive there and sometimes they don't. But the great thing about options is that you can truly find a really good fit for your child, and not just your child, your family. You can find your community, which is the beauty of independent schools and schools in general, for that matter. So the right fit for our friend may not be the right fit for you. We talked about that. If you have any further questions, as Wendy shared, we will be back with other webinars to really get into the sort of the fine meat of all these interviews, thank you notes, decisions, everything that we discussed, we'll discuss at length. And here's how you can find us. So people, you want to take a screen?
Yeah, it's, you know, I can't, the hour goes by so quickly. It's 7:44. I don't see any questions here, but I really invite everyone to send your questions to us. Here is our contact information. We'll also follow up with an email that shares the recording to this webinar and shares our contact information again. So I think that's probably the best way to reply to those emails and ask your questions, so we don't keep you guys you know, too much longer. I'm seeing lots of thank yous in the chat. Wonderful. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here. Wendy and Linda, I've learned so much. I always learn so much from you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa,
thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you everybody for attending.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.